This happened many, many years ago when I was a teenager, over 30 years ago. I understand that is a long time ago and memories fade. I was with my father, and he recalls this event, and I know for a fact that I might have forgotten minor details, but I will not embellish. It was Thanksgiving, and my mom and everyone was over for dinner, both sides of the family. My one grandma didn't drive, so she came with my aunt and uncle. After dinner, everyone left. My grandma wanted to stay longer to chit-chat, so Dad offers to take Grandma home. It was only a 15-minute drive anyway, so it wasn't a big deal. We chit-chat, etc. When Dad notices that it is now snowing really hard, we lived in the snow belt in Ohio with lots of lake-effect snow. When it starts to snow bad, you know it's time to get your butt moving and get off the roads. We bundle up Grandma, and my mom suggested that I go with my dad so I could help him get Grandma into the house, help him stay awake while driving. He was fine, and I'm sure to get out of the house so she could have some quiet time after such a long day. We head out, and it's snowing hard. Not a slushy snow, but big, heavy flakes. Grandma didn't live that far away, but we were taking country roads here, and the snow was piling up on the roads, and they were really dicey. There was and is one equally steep grade. The car barely made it up. We get Grandma home. As the weather is quickly getting worse, Dad said we need to get back on the road. Dad was truly worried about getting back up and down this deep grade and decided to take the back roads. They might not be plow, but there isn't really any hills or grades. We head out of town. Now these back roads are back roads. Very country, hardly paved, and lots of Amish houses. No streetlights and no stoplights. It is dark. These roads are fairly straight, and there's only one intersection with stop signs, no turnoffs, and side roads. There are plenty of trees, big maples, and other trees, as well as lots of brush, very thick. One side of the road is woods, and the other side is high wall of dirt and rock. We are driving, and that is concerting, intensely on the road. Me too, it's pitch black, and the only light is from our headlights. We are the only folks out here, on the road, as there are no tire tracks in the snow. We are both quiet and concentrating, when from behind we are almost blinded by headlights that just appeared at nowhere. They were far back, but we have been on the road for some time, and it was odd how they just appeared. We keep driving, and his car is quickly gaining on us. They are driving fast. My dad is going maybe 20 to 25 miles per hour, and now, and then, pushing it up to 30. This car was going way faster than that. Before we knew it, the car is right on our trail. They have the brightest headlights that I have ever seen, and I remember putting my hand over the passenger side mirror to block the light. After this went on for a very short period, the car makes a swerve and goes around us. I look out the back seat in the windows and notice the car was big vintage muscle car, maybe a Chevy Nova or a Chevelle. Not sure what type it was, but it was certainly a vintage muscle car. As it starts to overtake us, and this all happened within a matter of seconds, I glanced over, see that there are 3 people in the car. It almost seems like the car is lit from the inside. It's not glowing, but you can see right in. Maybe the dome light was on. In the backseat center was a guy with shaky hair wearing what looks like a buckskin jacket. The driver was also a shaggy-haired young man. He was leaning close to the steering wheel, arms almost wrapped around it. In the passenger seat was a young woman. She was wearing a big, floppy hat, and she was laughing. I could tell she was laughing because she seemed to be rocking in her seat, leaning forward towards the dashboard, as they were right by my dad's side of the car. In the back seat looks over at us. He really doesn't seem to notice us or care, just a blank expression. It seems a little odd at the time because you usually can't see into a car like that at night, so I do believe that the dome light was on. As they go around us, my dad says, "One asshole! He's gonna get killed driving like that." They pull up in front of us and slow down a little, as I'm sure they noticed there were no tracks in the snow to follow. They tap their brakes once and then take off. That is actually pretty through because now we have some tire tracks to follow, so he speeds up, but the car pulls ahead. We can still see the taillights in our following. We see them stop at the intersection and go straight. We do the same thing. We're keeping about 50 to 75 feet behind them. We drive over to the rise, and nothing. Nothing at all. No car, no tire tracks, no lights, just nothing. Just an empty, snowy country road. My dad slows down a bit and says, "What the hell? Where did the car go? We see nothing." The car could not have crashed, because now with Dad driving slow, we could have seen the car going off the road, and there are no sliding marks anywhere. We've been down these back roads many, many times, and we know for a fact that there are no turnoffs and side roads in this area. There's also no houses and no driveways to drive into. We keep looking left and right, and nothing. The tire tracks just vanished over the rise, and the car did too. We didn't talk the rest of the way home, I'm sure. We were both thinking the same thing. What the hell? When we make it home, we tell my mom. She is done too. When she sees how sacred me and my dad is, she believes us. Years later, I learned that my father went back the next day, while my mom and I were shopping to check the roads and woods. There were no signs of any accidents and no signs of the car being local to the houses. My dad is really shooken up from that experience, and even looked in the newspapers to see if any accident had occurred over Thanksgiving. He finally broke down and called the local fire rescue report a possible accident. He's not sure they actually checked it out, but they did call him back and say they found something. So, what happened? This is the first really creepy experience I've ever had. I don't like to talk about my personal experiences, but after this I really think I should share it. I don't know what it was, but I'm never going to that place again. Where to begin? The gist of this is my buddy needed someone to take care of his place in a remote insanity part of the county called Benjamin, while he flew to Alaska to see some friends and go fishing. Anyways, I pack up my things and head off to his place. I had been there a couple of times before, but we usually hang over at my place. It was around 30-minute drive when we barely got to see each other anyways. So I arrived at his place and unload my things from my car and head inside. Jackson had left a couple of hours before, but he texted me where he left the keys, and I was unpacking and settled down in no time. When I finally have the time to sit down, I noticed a note on the counter, and it said something along the lines of, "Hey, thanks again for taking the place. Be sure to feed the dogs twice a day and keep an eye out for the wild ones or coyotes. Remember to turn all the electronics lights off before it gets too dark to conserve electricity." I thought it a bit off for him saying this, but I brush it off. Good luck, buddy. So now that you have the gist of my situation and probably want me to get to the point, I'll rush to the scary parts. Basically, I was laying in bed at around 11 at night, reading a decent novel. I began hearing a scratching, almost like someone were caressing the back of their nails on a chalkboard, thinking it was a wild dog. I pull myself up and make my way to the kitchen. I left my .22 in the room as it's not really great for coyotes. And yes, I know, pathetic gun. I'm working towards a Magnum as I finally get into the kitchen. I located the source of the scratching. It seemed like it was coming from the kitchen door window, so I walked over, kneel down by, and push aside the curtain. The scratching stops, and I see these sparkling eyes reflecting from the light of the kitchen, of which I had recently turned on, staring at me from the porch. It looked kind of like a white, frail lady on her back, staring up at me with this distorted grin. I guess it could have been a frown. I was looking at her upside down, but I don't know. As suddenly, as I realize what I'm looking at, she suddenly is pulled down the steps and plunges into the sand, almost as if something was dragging her. Now, it's pretty dark outside, but I can see the full outline of her body, moving incredibly fast under the sand further and further away. I never knew I could run so fast in my life. I was on my bed with my .22 in one hand and my buddy's baseball bat in the other that entire night. The next morning, I packed up my things and left. Before I left, I checked the door she had been scratching at, and sure enough, marks were all along the bottom portion of the door. Now I've gathered up my courage enough to drive down every day to feed the dogs. Sunlight gives me courage, but I have never stayed there overnight again. I've talked to my friend about her, and apparently he has seen her many times and calls her the Sandwich. I know, hysterical. I'm just worried that this thing is a devil or something. Have any of you ever had any similar experiences like this? Update. I recently spoke with Jackson about the witch. He seemed almost annoyed, but I got some interesting information. My first question, based upon what some of you were wondering, was what exactly was the creature, and how long had he known about it? He told me that he didn't really know what it is, but that it had been there since he had moved in. It apparently talks to him and doesn't appreciate light. I'm starting to think the reason I turned on the kitchen light was the reason it scuttled off. I then asked him if he knew anything more about it. He seemed like he was getting agitated and asked me why I was suddenly so curious about her. I politely told him I was just wondering. And to forget I ever asked, I then hung up. I don't know what to think. I'm scared. But I think I'll spend another night there tonight and try to film it or something. Let me know if there's anything I should bring besides a camera in my gun. This happened about 10 years ago. When I was 18, this happened before the party incident that I have shared before. At this point, I have been working second shift at the front desk of a local sheriff's department, with my shift ending at 10 at night. This night was the beginning of my weekend, and I was picking up my friend from her aunt to stay at my house. My friend's aunt lived in a trailer park about 5 miles outside of town that you would have to take a bunch of twisty country roads to get to. So I'm still on the main route, talking on my cell phone with my boyfriend, now husband, who was based at Camp Pendleton then. I know this is bad, but it was late and hardly any other cars were on the road, and I'm a careful driver. The things got eventful with a quickness as I approached the turnoff for the back roads to my friend's aunt's. The turnoff was at a 4-way stop, and there was a truck in the oncoming lane, signaling to turn the opposite way that I was. But as I turn, the truck changes course and starts following me. I'm talking, this truck was on my bumper with his brights on the whole time. I was driving my early model Cavalier, so the headlights lit up on the inside of my car. I'm not freaking out yet, because drunk assholes behind the wheel is a pretty common occurrence where I'm from. My biggest fear at the moment was that he was going to hit my car. Then the truck speeds around me and starts to slow down. He was trying to pull me over, but I actually finally got a good look at the truck and relate everything to my boyfriend over the phone, make, model, color. I just couldn't read the license plates. They were caked in mud. So, this is going on for a little bit. The truck pulls in front of me, slows to a stop, and I go back around him. Finally, I just decide to take an initiative and stop. I figure I'll keep my car running and only crack my window. It's a country road in between fields. It'd be virtually impossible to really block a car on the road, unless you're terrified of driving in grass. So I stopped and cracked my window about 2 inches and kept my phone by my ear. The truck pulls up beside me and opens his passenger window and just leans across the seats to stare at me. Is there a problem? He doesn't answer. Can I help you? Finally, he snapped out of wherever he was. I thought you were somebody else. That made sense to me. I drove a really common car for the area. I knew of at least 4 others that were even the same color as mine. I breathe a huge sigh of relief. Okay, well, have a good night. I start driving again, but the guy pulls right back onto my bumper and keeps riding my ass. And now he's trying to bump my car. Now I'm panicking. I start giving my boyfriend instructions. I'm telling him where I am exactly and tell him to call my local dispatch and tell them to start looking for the truck. I'm convinced. I'm about to be abducted, but my boyfriend refuses to hang up. Finally, I drive up on the trailer park. I don't even break a signal. I take the turn at 50 miles per hour. To this day, I don't know how I held the road, but I did, and this truck is still on my ass. I immediately lay on my horn, thinking that if this guy is going to get me, then somebody's going to see him do it. I blared on the horror all the way into my friend's aunt's driveway, and the truck pulls in right behind me. My friend and her bomb both come off that porch. I noticed the pure horror on both their faces before the guy from the truck outside my window, banking on it in, both hands screaming, "I thought you were somebody else," over and over. Then he just jumps back into his truck and peels out. It took forever to calm my boyfriend down, and then to calm myself down, but eventually everyone relaxed. My friends and I got on with our night, and the next morning we went to file police reports. Unfortunately, without the license plate number, there wasn't much they could do, but I never did see that truck again. This happened 6 to 7 years ago when I was around 14 and still in school. Walking home one day, going through town, the weather was unbearable. Not like the nice sunny vibe sort of warmth, but the horrible bastard heat blanket type that suffocates the shit out of you. You know things are bad when the country you live in is so cold that anything above 15 Celsius is memorable. Anyway, I took off some of my school uniform, which consisted of a heavy wool blazer, long-sleeved gray jumper, and a tie. This was a mandatory outfit, living in Ireland and going to grammar school. Heavy-ass coats that people been wearing since 1667 when the ship first opened, with just a short-sleeve shirt on. I headed about it my merry way when this old man beckoned to me to come over from across the street. He was about 60 to 70, from the memory, with a little driving cap and a leather jacket on. Now, this is something that has landed me in trouble before. I cannot simply turn down a conversation. Regardless of when the local junkies approach or clear red flag scenarios unfold, I always entertain the fucking thing unintentionally. So, I walk over to this dude thinking, hey, maybe he just needs some directions. First thing he asked is, "Do you want some sweets?" and offered me a Terry's chocolate orange. When I reached out to take a piece, he just held my hand, like straight up staring into my eyes, and held my hand, rubbing it slowly. He then asked, "Would you like to come to my house for a cup of tea? Surely you must be tired and thirsty." Now I know the sensible thing to do here was call for an adult, seeing as there was hundreds around. Belfast is a very busy place. There are also police that often patrol the streets. All I had to do was shout or make a scene. Instead, what came out of my mouth was, "Nah, dude, that's kind of gay." Without any resistance, I released myself from his grip, took another piece of chocolate orange, and walked back over to my bus stop. Looking over my shoulder, he just stared at me, mouth open for a few seconds, and hurried off around the corner. I realize now that the smart thing to do was to report him, seeing as how this could have been something very dangerous for somebody else, and the man could very well still be out there. This is the first time I've ever told the story, so nobody else knows about it. Although the immediate danger wasn't there, per se, I think the implication weren't said enough. I lived in a rural town in Georgia, United States. Now I'm in college and my family still lives there. On my road, there were 4 houses, all spread out because we had our own land and farms. There was a dirt road turned off by my neighbor across the street's house. This dirt road had 2 houses, 2 swampy marsh areas, and an abandoned barn, a scrap metal yard including a creepy and old short bus, and a cemetery dating back to the 1800s, since there's obviously nothing to do. I had just moved out there, so we didn't have any ATVs or anything. Me and my friend went walking down the dirt road so she could see these things. Besides the houses and other things mentioned, the dirt road was usually used for logging, to make paper, or hunting. Me and my friend had just got into one of the hunting checkpoints when we decided to go back to my house because we were tired from walking so far. We got about 200 feet from my road when we saw 2 trucks pull side by side, one going out and one going in. I walked around the truck, said excuse me because I'm polite. I kept my head down and didn't look at the men, even though I should have, because as I was walking through, one man asked, "Hey, where are y'all girls going?" At this point, I was terrified. I have an intense fear of being kidnapped and raped, so I yelled, "Home!" and took off running with my friend right behind me. About halfway to my yard, I noticed the truck was pulling out. Then I moved to the side of the road on the grass. But the thing was, so did the truck. The man started speeding up and chasing us halfway into the grass, halfway off the road. I started bolting. It was pretty far ahead of my friend. And when I turned around, I saw he was really close behind her and close to hitting her, so I ran into the woods by my house, figuring the truck wouldn't be able to fit in there. I was tearing through branches and thorns. I had on a t-shirts and shorts, and my legs were bleeding all over. Trying not to lose control and breaking down, I can see the truck vaguely, but hear the guy yelling, "Come on now, the woods girls, I'm not gonna hurt you." No fucking way. I kept running until I got to my open field and up to my front door, where we found it locked, so we began pounding on it and screaming for help. My aunt opened the door, and we bounded in and began telling the story. No one really believed us or acted like they were worried. They just said not to stay outside alone anymore. I never saw that man's truck again near my house, and it makes me wonder what would have happened if he actually had gotten us. This incident took place back in the early 90s. My brother and sister-in-law, Julie, lived in a small house on my dad's property. It was located in a wooded area about 3 miles outside of a tiny town where we are from. My sister-in-law was a very attractive lady. She was about 26, with long blonde hair and a nice shape and all that. She and my brother on the weekends would at some point begin drinking, which would usually result in the two of them getting into some bad arguments. One Friday evening, they were arguing and fussing, and she got so mad that she decided that she was going to hitch a ride to town where her family was, which was the nearest major city, about 35 to 40 miles away. She had only gotten about a half mile from my brother's house. She had not even reached the main highway where there were cars passing, and she would begin to try to hitch a ride. On the road we lived on, there was a place where cars could pull over beside the road, and at this part of our road was mostly deserted. No houses, nothing but woods. This was also a very low traffic area, particularly late at night. As my sister-in-law was walking by, she said there were 2 men sitting in a truck. People often sat in that little spot and smoked a J or something. She didn't think that they would bother her, but as she walked by, one of them jumped out and pulled her in the truck with them. She was putting up a fight, but she was half drunk, and there were 2 of them, and while she screamed and tried to fight them off, they managed to get her jeans off. Before they could really commit to what they were obviously planning, a guy in another truck pulled up in front of them and shined his truck lights into the vehicle. They let her go. She jumped out, and the 2 guys sped away in their truck, and they got off. The guy that scared them off gave her his jacket to put over her missing jeans and gave her instructions to drive her back to her brother's house. She escaped a very close call. We never saw nor heard anything about those guys again, and I don't remember if my brother and sister-in-law called the law. Since this did happen a few years ago, I'm not sure anything could be happened now, but this is definitely one of the creepiest experiences I've ever been told. So, I have a horse, and he is just down the road from my house at the moment. It's about a 5-minute walk, but I found a shortcut through some fields. We live on a very quiet road in the middle of the country, so not much happens. But yesterday, at about 8:40 p.m., I was walking through the field to go see my horse Rio. Nothing strange happened, and as I was feeding him, he was looking to the field, which I have walked through, and didn't touch his food, which is very unlike him. His ears were perked up, and he would not take his eyes off the field, not even for his dinner. At first, I thought nothing of it. I just thought he'd seen a fox or a rabbit or something. So I decided to leave and walk back through the fields. About halfway up the fields, I felt as if I was being watched. Something felt very off, and I kept looking around, but saw nothing. And I started to speed up and climbed up to the first gate to get out of the field and started to speed up again because I felt as if something was chasing me, and it felt evil, and I did not feel safe. About halfway up to the second field, I could see the gate to the road and see my house just behind the trees. But I looked back and could not believe what I saw. I saw a black figure walking behind a tree in the field I had just climbed out of. I instantly stared, freaked out, and I started running as fast as I could, not looking behind me for a second, and trying not to trip in the wet, muddy field. Once I reached my front door, I was doubtful what I saw, but I know I saw something, and now I feel as if I'm constantly being watched. This was about 5 days ago. What do I do? What is that black figure? My grandparents moved out to the country in the early 80s. Where they moved was surrounded by nothing but fields and woods. Now, though, there are neighborhoods built around it, and it has become more suburbia than country. Anyway, my grandparents bought a huge plot of land for their house, cows, and other farm-type things. My grandfather built a barn about a quarter of a mile away from where the house was at. My grandpa smoked a lot. He still secretly does. It wasn't unusual for him to go up in the middle of the night and sneak outside for a smoke. Well, one night, he gets up to smoke and goes out on the front porch. He looks down at the barn, and it looks like there's a lantern on inside the barn, and he hears country music playing. He's really pissed because he thinks someone is trying to stay the night in there, so he goes inside and gets his gun. Yes, I live in the South. He tells my grandma the story about the light and the country music playing. He walks out Star and starts to walk towards the barn on the road outside the house. He notices the light isn't on anymore and the music has stopped playing. He still wants to check it out to see if someone is sleeping in there. He must have balls the size of coconuts, because there's no way I would have done that. He gets there, checks it out, and there's nothing. No lantern, no boombox, or anything to play music out of whatsoever. And there is not anything to prove that anyone was ever there 5 minutes ago, or at all. He was weirded out, but really not knowing what else to do, he starts walking back down the road. As he's walking, he said he could hear what sounds like someone walking behind him. He keeps turning around, and no one is there. He told me this story when I had gotten old enough, and it scared the crap out of me, and it still does. As I've gotten older, I've told people that he was lying, but my grandpa is definitely not a liar. The look he had on his face when he was telling me the story was definitely enough for me.